First is Toradol. Its generic is Ketorolac and it's used for moderate to severe pain. Second is Amoxil. Its generic is amoxicillin and it's used for bacterial infections. Third is Tramastat. Its generic is Tramadol and acetaminophen and it's used for moderate to severe pain. Fourth is Zoloft. Its generic is sertraline and it's used for depression. Fifth is Zithromax or Z-Pak. Its generic is azithromycin and it's used for bacterial infections. Sixth is Flaxeril. Its generic is cyclobenzaprine and it's used for muscle spasms. Seventh is Pristiq. Its generic is desvenlafaxine and it's used for depression. Eighth is Cipralex. Its generic is escitalopram and it's used for depression. Ninth is Macrobid. Its generic is nitrofurantoin and it's used for urinary tract infections. 10th is Sinequin. Its generic is doxepin and it's used for depression. 11th is Zofran. Its generic is ondansetron and it's used for nausea and vomiting due to cancer and chemotherapy. Number 12 is Crestor. Its generic is rosuvastatin and it's used for cholesterol. Number 13th is Synthroid. Its generic is levothyroxine and it's used for hypothyroidism. Number 14th is Spiriva. Its generic is tiotropium bromide and it's used for COPD and asthma. Number 15th is Reactin. Its generic is cetirizine and it's used for symptoms caused by allergies such as sneezing, nasal congestion, etc. Number 16th is Glucophage. Its generic is metformin and it's used for type 2 diabetes. Number 17th is Celexa. Its generic is citalopram and it's used for depression. Number 18th is Valtrax. Its generic is valacyclovir and it's used for herpes virus and shingles. Number 19th is Effexor. Its generic is venlafaxine and it's used for depression. Number 20 is Prevacid. Its generic is lansoprazole and it's used for gastroesophageal reflux disease or stomach acid. 21st is Wellbutrin. Its generic is bupropion and it's used for depression. 22nd is Baxten. Its generic is Bilastine and it's used for allergies. 23rd is Diclectin. Its generic is doxylamine and pyridoxine. It's used for treatment of nausea during pregnancy. 24th is Vinpred. Its generic is prednisone and it's used for suppressing immune system and inflammation. 25th is Claritin. Its generic is loratadine and it's used for allergies. 26th is Delicin. Its generic is clindamycin and it's used for bacterial infections. 27th is Neurontin. Its generic is gabapentin and it's used for seizures. 28th is Keppra. Its generic is levetiracetam and it's used for seizures. 29th is Norvasc. Its generic is amlodipine and it's used for hypertension. 30th is Tegretol. Its generic is carbamazepine and it's used for epilepsy and neuropathic pain. 31st is Ventolin. Its generic is salbutamol and it's used for asthma and COPD. 32nd is Januvia. Its generic is sitagliptin and it's used for type 2 diabetes. 33rd is Xarelto. Its generic is rivaroxaban and it's used for blood clots. 34th is Imodium. Its generic is loperamide and it's used for diarrhea. 35th is HP-PAK. Its generic is lansoprazole, amoxicillin and clarithromycin and it's used for H. pylori bacterial infection. 36th is Vivotif. Its generic is typhoid oral vaccine and it's used for typhoid. 37th is Dukoral. Its generic is cholera and traveler's diarrhea oral vaccine and it's used for preventing traveler's diarrhea. 38th is Abilify. Its generic is aripiprazole and it's used for schizophrenia. 39th is Clozaril. Its generic is clozapine and it's used for schizophrenia. 40 is Ciprodex. Its generic is ciprofloxacin and dexamethasone otic suspension and it's used for bacterial ear infections. 41st is Remeron. Its generic is mirtazapine and it's used for depression. 42nd is Circ. Its generic is betahistine and it's used for vertigo. 43rd is Trileptal. Its generic is oxcarbazepine and it's used for epilepsy. 44th is Coversil. Its generic is perindopril and it's used for hypertension. 45th is Nexium. Its generic is esomeprazole, and it's used for GERD or stomach acid. 46th is Lopressor or Betaloc. Its generic is metoprolol, and it's used for hypertension. 47th is Aspirin. Its generic is ASA or acetylsalicylic acid, and it's used for fever and pain. 48th is Oragel. Its generic is benzocaine, and it's used for numbing medicine for toothaches. 49th is Altase. Its generic is Ramipril, and it's used for hypertension. 50 is Seroquel. Its generic is quetiapine, and it's used for schizophrenia.